Welcome to DysFictional, an RPG-focused podcast.
Well, what better way to start a podcast off than introductions? I'm Randy. I have piercing blue eyes, and I'm vertically challenged. While the rest of my family mildly dabbed into pop culture, I've had a nerd culture modified into my DNA that turned me into basically a vampire gremlin hybrid. To age myself for the listeners, some of my first games when I was young were the original Sonic games, Lion King, Road Rash, Mortal Kombat on the Sega Genesis. I had 8-bit Super Mario and Castlevania and even Mega Man for the NES. I used to use streetlights to play the Game Boy Brick, and years later bought myself my own GameCube. I spent some of my best years in Diablo 2 and built my first computer for World of Warcraft raiding. First generation Tom from Toonami introduced me into the likes of Dragon Ball Z, Gundam Wing, Tenchi Muyo, and Outlaw Star. The Ninth Doctor was my first Doctor. Christopher Daniel Barnes was my first Spider-Man, which is the animated cartoon. And the theme song that will live to me to this day. I played a little bit of 2A D&D and 5e before becoming a 5e DM about for 2 years up until this point. And today I'm constantly wondering how to tie threads of my players' backstories into my D&D campaign so I can tear them apart emotionally as well as physically. I'm currently playing the Diablo series, Minecraft, Baldur's Gate, and whatever I can find on Steam while playing Jujutsu Kaisen, finishing Shameless, and waiting for that last season of Stranger Things. And I mean, I'm sure I have other things I could probably talk about, like how Fire Emblem is one of my favorite game series of all time. But that's about it for now. I mean, I gotta save something for the podcast, but if anyone else wants to join in.
Hello, I'm Ginger. I'm a former zookeeper turned vet tech turned tailor/stitcher for the TV and film industry. A strange leap, I know. Over the last year, I started playing D&D with these two nerds. And it's been pretty great. I love reading, writing, actual play podcasts, sewing for cosplay when I'm not working, and playing with my menagerie of animals when I'm not on set. I'm also currently playing Minecraft, Baldur's Gate 3, and a little game called Grounded. If anyone out there wants to help me defeat the Mant, hit me up. I'm really stuck. I need help. Much like Randy, I grew up in the Sega Genesis, and I've been a PlayStation girl pretty exclusively ever since, only recently branched out into PC and Steam games. My primary hobby is probably watching movies and cutting down the amount of words you'd have to change in a script to fix the movie to the least possible amount of words. But yeah, other than that, I'm just excited to talk about some RPG stuff with you guys. Tuki, what about you?
Hey everyone, I'm Tuki. No, that's not my real name, but it was a game handle that stuck for well over 15 years, so at this point, I think I'm stuck with it. I'm a former academic, definitely spent way too many years in school, but currently I'm a working professional in industry making some use of all of that time in school. Maybe. I've always had an interest in games, anime, and all things nerd-related growing up, but I got a lot more into it over the past 10 years or so. I also grew up on Sega and Nintendo, but ended up moving into PC games much more over time. What types of games I play honestly depends on who I'm playing with, but for the most part, I pretty much tend to stay with co-op focused games. I have a lot of dislikes and likes as far as genres go, but a lot of that also will depend on who I'm playing with. D&D for me has been pretty much a blast over the last few years. I think it's honestly been a great way for me to have interactions and kind of enjoy that co-op style of play I always enjoyed in video games. Most of my experiences are from what I've done over those past few years and the various campaigns that the three of us here have done with others, and I'm looking forward to sharing all of that with you.
Randy, kick us off with how we met.
Oh, man. So I remember it like it was 15 years ago. So back in my old young days, I was one of them World of Warcraft players, just like pretty much everybody at my age. Played through quite a bit of Warcraft. Whenever we changed servers with some of my friends, we joined another raiding guild, and Tuki was a part of that raiding guild, and yeah, he was pretty cool at the time. And not anymore. But after a while, we quit WoW, but we moved on to, I think it was League of Legends or something like that, just right after WoW. And then played that for at least a year or two, and pretty much since then I've just been playing games back and forth. And then again, like 10 years ago, maybe longer at this point, I met Ginger through a convention panel, just kind of chatting while we were waiting for one of the voice actors to show up. And then the next day we happened to stumble across them again, kind of exchanged information, and we've pretty much been talking ever since.
I think we were all cosplaying from the same property that day, which is why we started talking.
Yeah, I mean, probably. I honestly, I remember the day that we met you the second time, you were cosplaying from it. I don't remember if I think we were cosplaying it the first day, and then you guys were in it the second day, but we were kind of like heading out.
That's right. We split the days, and then it was one of those things where you meet so many people at conventions that you hit it off with, like while you're waiting in lines, but you never get their name.
Oh, for
sure.
sure.
And then afterwards, you're like, "Oh, I should have asked." And then you never see them again. But then we did see you again. And I remember the next day being like, we should get your info.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, we've done a lot of cons together since that.
Oh, yeah. Shared rooms because, it's a lot cheaper. And then eventually slowly kicking out almost everybody till it was just us.
The last survivor.
Yeah. The last ones who could tolerate each other in there.
And then it's been just a little over a year since you brought me into your D&D game, which is how I met Tuki.
Did you?
Did I? Tuki, you were there, right?
I'm pretty sure I was there for that. Yeah, that sounds about right.
Oh. Was I there?
You guys... Yeah, no.
Oh, okay.
No, you had an established group that I had been trying to get into for 4 years? A long time. I bugged Randy about joining his game for a really long time. And then you finally had a opening.
And you had an opening.
And I had, make it sound like it was all my fault.
We all had an opening.
Yeah, and then I just crashed into your life like a wrecking ball and ruined everything, right?
That's basically how we met, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And then pretty much our first interaction was when we realized that we both chose characters with a French accent at the same time. And of course yours was better, even though I'm pretty sure I picked it first. And that's at least what I'm sticking by.
I don't think we've ever actually talked about that. I picked mine literally as I was sitting down to play that night. So yeah, it was definitely you picked yours first.
Okay. Then yeah. And then so mine ended up just being this kind of awful interpretation of a French accent, which kind of was funny to do, to be honest.
I didn't think it was bad at all. I thought mine was really over the top and cringy and stupid. But it was fun. The reason I did that, which I would probably never do again, is I was working on a film at the time with nothing but people who spoke French, and we'd been speaking French for months in the office to each other, and I was trying to practice the accent, and I was like, well, it's a D&D game. Maybe if I get in some extra practice at the end of the week every week, it'll help me fit in better at work. I don't think it did, but it was fun either way.
Yeah, and for me, to be honest, I think that was the first character I decided to even do a voice for. So I really don't know why I went with French, to be honest, but that was the choice that I made.
Oh, I didn't know that. I didn't know that. Like your other characters were just your voice.
Yeah, no, before that I didn't really do voices as we were playing.
Yeah, it can be fun, but it can also be extra stress for sure.
I think part of the hard part of a voice, especially for the beginning, is trying to have the voice not interrupt your actual speaking, because you have to think about the character voice and then you have to think about like what you're going to say, which makes things even harder for a lot of people. And I mean, I tend to avoid the accents and stuff like that in general. I just go for wacky sounding voices and sounds because I find it just easier, and some people could be even less offensive. Who knows?
Yeah, that's fair. I think, yeah, I always tell people, like, if any of my friends are like, oh, I want to play D&D, but like I don't know how to do like accents and stuff, I'm like, don't, like, you do not have to. That is not a requirement in any way.
Just changing your pitch a little bit or changing how fast or slow you talk, that's all you really need, if anything.
Or even just your attitude.
What'd you say about my attitude?
I said change your attitude.
Fine.
Tiki, do you have any fun stories from you and Randy's Warcraft days? Did you ever pull a Leroy Jenkins?
No Leroy Jenkinses, but I mean, definitely way too much time wasted just being logged in a random city doing nothing. But I will say I could add a little color to the fact, and I don't know if anyone out there has had the same experience, probably so, but Randy was from a group of friends that basically we had never even met. We just played games for, I don't know, what was it, like 4 years before we actually met in person?
Yeah, something like that. Because it was after WoW.
Yeah. So basically we already had stopped playing WoW at that point. We're playing other random games, and that's when we decided to actually meet.
That's when experience. You knew it was real.
Exactly. You guys were not going to kill me.
Yet.
Unless they're playing the long game.
It's the long
later.
con of it. I mean, you know me from D&D. Like, it's definitely the long con with me.
That's not the long con. You're just constantly trying to kill me.
Yes.
Well, that's the constantly trying to kill you in game is a distraction.
Yeah,
for
exactly.
1 day.
Okay. I see. It's all building up. All makes sense now.
Just to add to the paranoia, and then you wake up and it was all just a dream, and then you die.
Speaking of the current campaign, maybe it'll make sense to give a little bit of background on what we're doing to those who are listening.
They're just acting like idiots. So, for the current campaign that they're in, I think it'd be easier to start from the beginning. So, as the players, they were given that they were going to be a part of a guild. They knew it was a previous character's guild, and that it was a devil-based campaign. And for those that don't know, demons and devils are very different, and they all hate each other. But they're all in the umbrella term of fiends, and that comes into play a lot because they don't remember that. And some devils think that they're racist because they call them demons. But anyway, so they get into
it was one time.
Yeah. Everyone's one time like adds up, you know? But so they get into the guild and they're given some rules and stuff. They go through a, quest, and it kind of goes, mildly okay. And then they get some information about themselves. And then from there, they kind of are set off on their own to various degrees. They find out that over, a course period of time that the what they're doing for the guild, like trying to hunt devils and stuff, that there's an over looming, basically apocalypse happening. And as they're slowly finding this out, that this is becoming way bigger than they had anticipated. And by the way, they already started off at 10th level, so they were already powerful at this point, but finding increasingly powerful things after them. And then we find out that the guild master is slowly kind of not all caring.
I don't know what you're talking about. He was a brilliant, is a Brilliant leader, caring about all of the fellow guild.
Oh yeah, for sure. Um, but slowly they find out that a lot of the guild members had already been wiped out, and they may or may not have been the lasting members left. And so they don't really get much response from their guild master, to the point that they feel like they're kind of on their own. And then randomly just get an invite years later. In fact, they had a little bit of a reintroduction of characters, kind of having a time apart for a set amount of time. They weren't given the amount of time until after everything was done, but they all achieved something in the course of a time skip, basically. It was a great way to reintroduce characters as well.
Yeah, we all achieved stuff during the time skip. Yep.
Yep. Equally.
Yep.
I didn't say you achieved good things. You just achieved things.
I feel like I lost things.
Your achievement was losing stuff.
One person's loss is another person's gain, whatever.
I think the biggest thing to know for if we reference our current campaign in the future is that it is a Gestalt campaign, which means that we're playing 5e, we're playing 5e rules, but we're 2 full classes. Instead of taking levels in a class, we're 2 full levels of each class. So that, playing with you, that has been really new for me. It is wild. I didn't really understand how the build worked at first, and I kind of split some of my stats in an inconvenient way, but it's led to some really interesting and fun character stuff. So it's been a good time.
Yeah, I personally find the great thing about Gestalts is the freedom of having more to do, or just to be a perfected version of something you wanted, like to be something like a Darth Vader, where you kind of want to be like a full martial character, but you also got to have that magic in there because we got the Force. But it doesn't really feel that necessarily paladin. There are options with that, but why go through those kinds of options when you could just combine them? Basically, it does add a level of extra power to the players, but they still have overall the same action economy. So for me, it gives them a lot more options too, and which allows challenges to be a lot more challenging as well, because they have more utilities to try to dispose of it anyway, like the infamous locked doors.
Number 1 enemy of any D&D party.
And then after 2 hours, you find out it wasn't locked.
I think the other thing that's been interesting, and you were kind of giving a rundown of what we're currently doing in the campaign, but even the start of it, you've pretty consistently fed in things from our characters' backstories or our characters' history into the actual campaign itself, or the actual story, and that's obviously evolved over time as we've played. But I think that's been an interesting one too, is the tie-in of all the different characters' stories into the main story.
Yeah, so one of my favorite things to do, this is my 3rd campaign running, and easily the longest, as the first 2 were trials, but they're all my own self-found creations. And what I really like to do is have an overarching story, something that has a point A and point B, and then or a point A to point C, and then we'll figure out point B as we kind of go along. But then I love to put people's backstories in there, like maybe the big bad was actually a dead relative or something like that, or someone's like whole family was killed by the big bad, things like that. Or even just have really good side quests that help with the story, like having a parasite insect in your brain while you're really doing an undead campaign, but hey, randomly mind flayers are around, so let's deal with them first.
Or this wonderful guild master that I keep defending happens to have been my previous character from another campaign.
Yeah,
things
exactly.
like that. He was a different man back in the previous campaign.
You just don't know him like I knew him.
Yeah, he's almost like, it's like he's played by an entirely different person.
Crazy.
Would you say that the point B that you found for this particular campaign was more or less like the time skip period of time?
Yes. So I had already had the time skip in mind. So my biggest reason for the guild was to get the characters together. Having it be a previous character's guild makes you see your characters grow after you're done playing them. And I think that's a lot of fun for players to see as well. But eventually, I don't want them to be overshadowed by it. So the whole point of it was to eventually the guild be their own from various means and stuff like that. So the time skip was always going to probably be some sort of play. It's just how was it going to function? And of course, your character in particular was a big catalyst for the time skip in general. But getting everybody to do that, because there were many ways that it could be played out. Everyone could have been together except you. You could have said no. And then like many things could have happened. You guys could have been stuck in a demi-plane for a few years instead of a few months, maybe. Who knows? But I would say the point B has been more making sure that a lot of the, say, devils and everything you guys have been coming across is not as random, or at least they have something. Either they're connected to someone, like they just fought a devil named Lel, who's strongly connected to one character's backstory. Everyone else probably could, kind of care less for it or ignore it, but it's a guild member and she's doing bad things to a bad place, and certain people can't just let that slide anyway. So they go and help out, and there you go. You get a person's backstory touched on and completed, perhaps, and then you also get it to overarch with the answers and questions to the main story itself.
So as far as this campaign went, it is only my second time playing in a campaign that has lasted longer than like 2 sessions. I did DM for a little bit for a short-term campaign that was ended when quarantine hit, because the players I was playing with just really wanted to play in person, so we just couldn't continue. But I've never been in a long format campaign like this. And it was interesting how we set it up, because you give us like the guild rules, and like you said, think about, do you want to be a veteran in the guild? Do you want to be a new person? Do you want to be a mercenary or like an adjacent member? And there were like a lot of options to try to figure out like what the build was going to be. And so this was the first time I ever kind of built a relationship into it. And that was with you, Tuki.
Yeah, and then our characters, I believe we're the only 2 actually had connections with this guild going into it. So we both had the connection with the guild. We both had connection to each other. We even did a pre-session 0, I guess a session -1, with our 2 characters, of like your character interviewing with me essentially to join the guild. And that definitely was a different experience for character creation style. So I can talk a little bit about that. I mean, usually, I know for myself, when I'm creating characters, I don't go crazy into preparing it ahead of time. I usually just like to do, bullet points or
usually
certain
the night
events.
Before.
No, it's definitely way in advance.
Sorry, the night of, yeah.
No, like at least an hour before that. But yeah, I like to just have like, some events that happen to them, major events, and then basically those events will get them to the starting time of the campaign. And then for me, I like to develop a lot of the character during the campaign, pretty heavily in like the first few sessions. I'll get sort of the personality where I want it to be, and then that will even change over time, especially in a campaign like this one that we've been playing with a big time skip, which definitely influenced the character more. But yeah, that's sort of how I've always done it. How about you guys for character creation?
Yeah, for this one was crazy because I was working on a film when it was time to create her, and I literally just had no time to really put thought into the story part. And I needed all of the creation time that I took creating her was in her stats and spells, because I picked 2 caster classes. So I'm playing a celestial warlock and a war cleric at the same time.
With almost no strength.
With almost no strength at all. But she's a spell sniper and a warcaster, and it's just there's a lot of slots and a lot of spell economy to track all the time, and a lot of she's an Eladrin, so there's a lot of also built-in features and traits. So I was very into my spreadsheets, just trying to get all of her stuff down, so that when we started playing, I wasn't taking like 40 minutes to decide what she's going to do every round. And so I didn't really think too much about her backstory. I basically based her backstory on what classes she was. And I've kind of learned that as I go, I tend to do that. Like, I'll start with the end point of something in the stat build and work backwards from there to create, like, how did you become this person, almost? So as like a split warlock and cleric, it was like, okay, well, obviously she has kind of 2 deities, like a deity and a patron. They probably don't agree, or maybe she thinks they do, but they don't. One of them could be evil, one of them could be good. And I left a lot of that stuff up to Randy, so that because I didn't think she would really necessarily know. So a lot of that is still coming out for me in the information that comes up. Like, I still, all these months later, I'm like, I don't know if I trust them. But it's given a lot of extra depth and everything. But I really gave her, I think there was like 1 paragraph of her personality, the names of her family members, and she was like a noble status, and that was like pretty much it. Like, I didn't really do a lot of work. I did a lot more work just doing the guild interview with you than I did actually making her character sheet.
Yeah, it's more like an A for the prep you did with all the spells and all this other stuff, and then just just 5 minutes backstory.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I guess mine was actually sort of the other way around, where I actually had more, not that I had a lot of it, but like the backstory events that I did have came almost before I even knew it was going to be, like I knew it was going to be a rogue bard mix for the character, but I didn't really have any of their stuff picked out per se until I already had some of the major events, and then fit them into that of like, oh, okay, what would someone who had gone through this event, would that have shaped what sort of skills they picked? And so and then even still, while the campaign's going on, half the time I'm picking, we level up and I'm picking my skills or feats based on what's going on currently in the campaign, and what would they have picked currently based on what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I think, and not that either one is inherently right or wrong, but I think there's 2 ways that backstories are super not useful, but how backstories are made. So backstories are often either made for the player, for the DM. It often can be both to varying degrees, but later on, especially the more people play, the more they find out what information's for them, like how the character's been feeling and stuff, which can be used for the DM. And then things that like names and people and places and actions and consequences that happen from those and stuff are great ways to have information for the DM. But it also depends on the DM, because not every DM tends to use a character's backstory a lot or enough, and it depends on pre-built campaigns and things like that. But as far as me creating characters, I had one that I just wanted to be a druid who thought he was an elf, or sorry, a dwarf who thought he was an elf. And it kind of spiraled from there, like, typical dead parents, but like kind of orphan, because that just makes sense in that kind of style. But I didn't care about the parents. So for my dwarf / elf, I kind of figured that he'd be somewhat of a loner, but like an okay loner. Like he knew he didn't fit in, and he tried his best, but just knew that things were a little bit different. Not that people just were mean to him. It's just he knew he was different. Kind of finding solitude in the nature, and then that's when I kind of figured out druid. And then from there, kind of built it from there. I liked the idea that nature was always on his side, so I kind of went more of a summoner druid, specifically the Circle of the Shepherd, which is a cool one because it also had a lot of healing capabilities and stuff, and I was a big fan of that. Then I had another one who was just based off of someone else's character, trying to be like a BFF, trying to get them along, and kind of went there with a sorority girl, which is just so much fun. But that one was interesting because I picked a sorcerer, and I went with the Calistar just because I was trying to be like more of a psychic base, because I thought that would be a lot of fun, mostly illusions and things. And she doesn't pick up anything on her own. She either mage hands it or has someone else do it, which I thought was hilarious, with a strength of like, I think it was 6 was probably her strength. Could be an 8. But but then after the first session, I looked more on the Calistar and saw that they're like a soul and a body kind of joined together. But it doesn't specify anything that like one of them goes away. So I had the great idea of being like almost not as a dual personality is what I called it, because they could interact back and forth, and the other personality just wanted the sorority girl to be happy. So she kind of like went along with it. And the other one's heavily selfish, but it was a way to balance out the selfishness for a party to have just this other self kind of tap in. And mind you, these were also evil characters. So like the selfishness was kind of a part of why it was like an extra level of evil. But when you create evil campaign and evil characters, the very first thing you want to do is make sure you're a part of a party. So you got to think, why is my character with a party? Or else you're just making an evil character and not working well with people. And then why is your character even there with them? So,
well, one thing I noticed too, and even just from you describing how you make your characters, but it definitely feels like, and again, not that you can't be reactive, because you are that as well, but it definitely has felt like from the characters I've played with that you've created, you like to shape their destiny proactively a lot more, versus I think one of the things that I've really enjoyed is just being very reactive to situations. I've kind of described this a little bit, but yeah, I mean, I would say 99% of my character development, especially this current campaign, has been very purely from something happening and then me trying to think as the player, like, okay, how would that character respond? And I think one nice thing that I found with this current character, even more so than previous ones, is that my reactions to events is almost become instinctual. I don't know if that's a good or a bad thing. Maybe too much of myself is leaked in to the character at different times. But yeah, and I've really enjoyed that. I mean, that's definitely been something new-ish for me. But yeah, just reacting to everything going on. And then, of course, all the interactions that's led to with, like your character, Ginger, where my character is just creating plenty of headaches for you.
Yeah, it gets like that, especially if you really are heavy on the RP, which our group tends to be as much as possible, which is great. The character becomes kind of a golem of sorts, where, sometimes, Randy, you'll be like, well, you didn't have to react that way. You could have chosen for her to do this. And I'm always like, no, I couldn't. Like, she said, nah. Like, I didn't have, like, I don't always necessarily feel like I'm in charge of her. I feel like, I own her license and registration, and she's like her own entity.
Which is the best way to play.
Yeah, it because it gets a lot more natural and unfolds a lot easier. And going back to our session 0, I really loved it because Tuki basically had to interview my character to see if your character was going to let me into the guild, and it was a really like tense interview. Not necessarily like on purpose, but I remember being like actually nervous when we went into it, like it was a real job interview. Because in my job, we don't ever have those. Like I haven't had a job interview in like a decade, and I was just like, oh man, like, and you were asking all these really like deep questions, and of course, like I had barely introduce myself to my own character. So like at this point, if we did that again, I would know exactly what she would say, you know, but on that day it was like, I don't really know her yet. I don't know how she would respond to this. And it was a little bit nerve wracking, like a little bit like, oh, what if I don't get the job? I have to roll a new character. But what I loved about it was that our interactions that day between them really set the tone for like their whole future relationship in a way that I was not expecting.
Yeah, and it is funny that you mentioned it because just prior to us doing that interview, I think I in real life was involved with an interview or two. So I literally tried to feed in like real world interview style questions, but into a D&D world essentially.
Yeah, and I really wish I could remember any of them, but I was like white noise in my brain the whole time, just like trying to think of answers. I don't remember, but like some of them were really like, because this is a guild that hunts fiends, you know, so some of them were just like, how much do you value your life and things like that. Like we're just like, your recruiter pulled me off the street, are you okay? Like these are some really big questions. But yeah, it's been fun having that as a baseline, and it really fed into how things have gone since. So that was cool.
So yeah, you had mentioned that I'm more of a person who likes to almost have a predetermined path of my characters, and I definitely think that has a lot to do with the way that the difference between specifically I think you and I look about, say, creativity differently, because I just can't turn it off and constantly am thinking about it, so much so that I actually ruined one of my characters' entire story, or more ruined me wanting to play the character, partially just because I had already played the campaign in my head. We had taken
I'm guilty of that too.
Yeah, we had taken so long to start the campaign that by the time I did, I was already like, I just want to be a merchant now, like. And then the moment, so it was a character who followed, think like his own version of Superman or something, except Superman is more like King from One Punch Man, where it's just this fraud, but like everyone sees it but me somehow, kind of the opposite of where Saitama's the only one who knows that he's kind of a fraud. And so the moment that something had really bad happened to him, like the gears are starting to click a little bit, and I kind of wanted to stretch it out more, where over time, like my hero is slowly being destroyed, but the campaign was a little bit too tough. Everyone was kind of being goofy characters, and it was a difficult one to pull off. And then as soon as something really bad happened to my hero, I was like, peace this, I'm out. No, I can't do it. I'm sorry. And then, just goes lives his life as an alchemist.
Well, and that same campaign too, I made the mistake of basing a new character almost too much off of a previous character that I enjoyed. Like I really liked the character I had played in the campaign before that. So I was like, oh, okay, let me play a character that is the son of that previous character. And, then I based, I think, a little bit even too much of the personality off of like, oh, well, this person's going to be everything that their father wasn't, or something like that. And that ended up being what I would definitely refer to as one of my more boring characters, as they just... everything was sort of almost, and maybe this is why now thinking back to it, but everything was almost predetermined how they would respond from the beginning, because it would just be the opposite of how the father would have responded, or too similar to how the father would have responded, because in reality they were actually the same person, in like a decision making standpoint. So yeah, that was definitely a weird one too. And yeah, I mean, you were just mentioning it, and yeah, I agree. I think the creativity that you were talking about that's sort of what I meant by you kind of proactively shaping the destiny of your characters, is you already have the ideas for it versus like me. And, my experience of D&D in general is really just from the campaigns. I don't consume a lot of other like D&D lore or anything like that. But so, and even in general, my creativity tends to come from reacting to other things that are going on, other people's ideas. I don't know, that always for me feels like that's where I get my best ideas, is
for sure
like reacting.
And I mean, my first one with you, the druid, whose, by the way, his name is Iris Willamai, and he, his backstory, aside from his backstory, like his whole stick was just, like nature's calling. Like one of the biggest moments is like, I like to think, say like near death and death experiences and stuff to really change a character. Tuki could probably vouch for that a little bit, as a mimic house, nearly kills him and changes his whole perspective on life. But my character Iris took it as, if I'm meant to die, then I'm dead. If not, I'll come back. And that kind of faith in nature is what kind of just drove him to do whatever. But there were signs eventually that appeared up. Like everyone in the campaign was shocked when there was this moment of this goddess from Curse of Strahd who was basically asking for a challenger and stuff. And the way that it was set up from my perspective was like there were these flowers that appeared and like this light, and there was another hint there that my character spoke up. A character who's fairly passive on fighting, but like felt like this was his calling, kind of like, this is calling on me to be this champion, to like help do something. And he ended up becoming not the ambassador. What's the other word? For a king.
An avatar?
No. He became like an advisor to one of our characters who is gonna be taking over Strahd, basically, is what we were kind of trying to do. And that whole stuff was, of course, not something that I thought of or even nearly thought that he was going to do. And that character was a good example of someone who I specifically left a big vague but a good driving force. Kind of like a paladin who always has his code that was a style of code, but it was allowed to be chaotic. So like the sort of greater good path even.
I do not think that I could ever successfully do a campaign of evil characters. I literally like even when I'm playing video games, like all these people online that are playing Baldur's Gate 3 and they're doing like the Dark Urge run, I'm like, nah, I couldn't do it. I feel so bad every time. And I don't like to play, like I quit playing Monster Hunter because I felt bad for the monsters. Like I just couldn't do it.
You just got to be the evil character that's killing off all the monster hunters that are hunting the monsters, because the monsters are killing the people.
Yeah, exactly. Like it would have to be a very specific circumstance. So like this campaign, I keep feeling like there are so many opportunities for my character to go evil, and I'm always just like, okay. But if we do that, how am I gonna do it where she's having a good time, but I am also still having a good time?
Yeah. I think if I ever played a true evil campaign, because I agree, I also would struggle with some of the same things as you do with that, Ginger, and I think I would just have to play the oblivious character. Like that would be really the best way for me to just go along with what the party's doing, and again, that like reactive style to what's happening around them. But like, yeah, I would just go with someone who's just sort of maybe dumb and oblivious to what's going on around them.
Just good intentions straight to hell.
Yeah. It's also funny because, Randy, you're talking about all the intricacies of your character Iris there that you had in that campaign. That was, I think, our first campaign that we had done a couple years ago. And yeah, you're going into all these intricacies of the character's mindset versus I'm pretty sure my entire character was shaped by two events in that campaign. One was a pie that he ate in session like 4 or 5. And then the other was a weapon he found that called out to him. And then because it called out to him, he thought it was a sentient weapon the whole rest of the campaign. It wasn't. It wasn't.
Yeah.
And I was reminded of that by the DM at that time, that it was not a sentient weapon. But those two events were literally what shaped, I think, that entire character for me.
Was the pie sentient?
Oh God, the pie! It was so funny. So
I haven't heard the story about the pie.
It was a pie addiction.
So it's spoilers, I guess. But in Curse of Strahd, there's the basically a hag, I believe, that has, I don't remember, I think it's called like a dream pie or something like that. Basically, it makes him go unconscious and like I think just lucid dreams and stuff. And he took that as an addiction for no, and one of those things, it had no lingering effects, but it lingered for him. And he's like, I want more. And
I see. So this is something you do a lot. This is like the joy juice, and this is something you do all the time.
Yeah, that character didn't have motivations at all, right?
Yeah.
Like and that character was also a very oblivious character. I think it was like a barbarian, like a defensive barbarian or something I was playing. But it didn't really have many goals. And then suddenly this pie comes along that I decided to interpret that way. And suddenly that was his goal in life, was just like everything that was going on. It was just, I would keep having the character think about, well, like, yeah, but how can I get more of that pie? Or does this get me towards that pie?
Funny enough, with you mentioned barbarian, and my first evil campaign, I was a barbarian. The group I was with wasn't, I didn't know them super well, except one person who was like a childhood friend, basically, I kind of had a character who was a higher thug for another character, and I basically played the characters kind of almost going along with whatever my like hiree said, but all he really wanted was a super good fight. So he was like lawful evil because he had I'm not going to hurt an unarmed person, but I'll throw a stick at him and beat the shit out of him if, he picks it up. So the laws are kind of loose there, but definitely it didn't matter who I was hitting if they had a weapon on them. But he ended up being the antithesis of someone who didn't play evil right, because he was trying to keep everything from the party. He was trying to have this hideout that the group kind of also decided they wanted, and he was getting upset because thinking that someone talked to them and that they didn't come up with the idea. Basically just not being a party player. And we're like, but you still have to be with the party. And I had to go along with it. But then take that with my my psychic Kalistar, who is our other evil campaign, which again, her name was Koshella. And she was a party player because while she was incredibly selfish and wanted dibs on any items she could use, she usually only wanted items she could use. And it was a little bit of a meta knowledge there, with knowing that I'm the only sorcerer and almost the only that kind of caster, that most of the loot would probably be for me or for anybody else, not both of us. So it kind of worked out anyway, and we didn't get too much loot.
And that campaign that you're talking about, I almost wouldn't even refer to it as an evil campaign. It was really more of like a chaotic group, I think, is what sort of worked out better, which is, that sometimes is a way to play it as well. But then really the last two campaigns, which have been the ones that you've been a part of, Ginger, they've been hard to describe them, but I would say neutral and potentially good leaning, I would think. Mm-hmm. That probably is a fair assessment of them.
Yeah, our first campaign we played together was an underwater setting, and it was much more combat based, not nearly as much RP. It was a lot shorter of a campaign. My character for that campaign was just along for the ride, kind of. Like she was pretty chaotic as a character. But yeah, this group that we have now, I would say definitely is like neutral, very morally gray, but good leaning. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Very morally gray.
Yeah, if the right if the right thing tugs on them, they may do a bad deed for the thing that's tugging on them. But
for the greater good.
Yeah, they try to help people, but every now and then it's like, I mean, you could probably let one person go for, the shiny. Come on.
And even that,
what we never did that.
Never.
And even that is still character dependent, because there's at least a couple of characters that would still be more good, I would say, than others.
Yes.
Versus, I know my character, for
Not
example, wouldn't really care too much about what's going on with the others, as long as it like fulfills the mission that they're on.
Yeah, it's unnerving that I'm probably like the second most good character.
You are. Yeah.
Yeah, because I'm also very morally gray. So it's a low bar.
I mean, you held a ritual for a whole town that got annihilated versus none of us did anything in remembrance. So yeah, there's good there.
She has empathy, but when it comes down to like us or them, it's not really, she's still a warlock on the inside.
Yeah, and then like the self-defense of that kind of thing all depends on how you're self-defending. Like if you're burning down a village because a few people fought, well, then you're probably not a really good person. But if you defended yourself off a few thugs like the start of that campaign, then yeah, you'd still be a good character or a good person.
Well, another thing that's really been a factor this time, because of the guild structure, is who's in charge, right? Like, and the burden of leadership. And I think, yeah, for technicalities, we've ended up kind of passing it back and forth a few times and talking even about getting rid of it altogether. Like we have a lot of different options, but it actually does sort of change their decision-making process, which I've never done before. Like there were things that we did several weeks ago now during the whole tower thing that she would have done differently if she wasn't leading the group in that moment. So that kind of stuff also can like push and pull your character development in interesting ways. And even just having, you were talking about just being reactive and having a character that just reacts to things around them. It's like first you have the things around you and the campaign setting and the enemies, but like also in this group, because it's gone so long and the characters are interacting so much more than normal, and there is so much like more relationship building between them, they also shift your reactions. So like there's been several times where I've been like, oh, what would the dwarf think if I did this? Because if he was gonna be mad, I wouldn't make him, so it's like you're not only considering what would your character do, but like what would your character think about what everyone else thought they should do.
That's what also changes a person from being evil to being good or neutral, because usually an evil person thinks themselves first and the consequences second. So that's always a thing. And while our dwarf friend wasn't necessarily a bad character or an evil or even probably a neutral character, starting off by blasting the party with Dawn was a good way to introduce himself. And then, and nowadays he is the same way where he's like, can I Dawn? So.
Yeah, he actually cares if he accidentally kills us now. That's nice. That's what we call character development.
Exactly.
Versus mine is like, nah, go for it. You can kill me. It's fine. And another side effect of the development throughout this campaign. Well, I mean, and even the leadership thing, going back to that, like that was something else again that Randy, you created the idea of, like the backbone of the story, having the guild and who would be leader. And then for me, I use that as sort of the primary development tool for my character, at least for the first half. That and getting melted by a mimic house that ate me. Those were sort of the two primary character development things for this one in the first half.
At some point, we're going to have a discussion about real player trauma in D&D games.
I mean, it was also a way for me to give you a challenge for you as a player, because you typically were a character who kind of sat in the back and was more reactive, and this was to give you an opportunity to see how you do as a more vocal character, or have to be the decision maker, which we know you're not a big fan of making decisions, but I think it ended up overall being a good thing, providing another step for you to do. And I think it's really brought you out of your shell of being not necessarily a one-dimensional character, but being the character with a shtick, and kind of being a full-fledged character with the shtick plus.
Well, yeah, no, and that, I mean, like I said, honestly, that's been fun because it, like the leadership thing, I basically tried out a bunch of different ways of leading the group over time. Some of that shaped by the other characters, the other players, but then also being shaped by what was going on. Like, you know, again, after basically dying to the Mimic House, and being very nonchalant after that, like the leadership was kind of like, it took some hits for a little while, right? And then kind of re-galvanized due to some other events, and ended up in a pretty good spot. I should say before the time skip. I'm sure we'll talk about all this in future podcasts, but a lot of things changed during that time skip. Leadership as well afterward.
What?
A little bit.
But some of this too. I mean, I know, you know, Randy, it's still an ongoing campaign, so I'm sure there's, you know, things that we would love to hear you tell us that you can't tell us yet.
Nah, you already know. You're all gonna die.
Well, that's a constant. Yeah.
Yeah. The ever looming threat of death.
Just seems like every character tends to roll those attacks on me and Ginger, huh?
You just have this like
punchable face.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I was gonna say there's just something about you that just people just, man, they just want to see like what you look like dead.
Okay. Next campaign, I'll make just a super happy-go-lucky, likable character. Then.
This makes me want you dead all the more.
And
I was gonna say that's not gonna help you.
All right, I'll make Eve.
No, I feel like every campaign Randy picks one person to just constantly murder, and last time it was one of our other players, but this time it's definitely been you.
It's sort of the dice rolls too, right? Like we had just a recent session where it felt like, it felt like that, like, oh yeah, no, my character is being targeted, but in reality, it was just the rolls, right? Like rolls just were hitting my character versus they weren't hitting other characters. So yeah, definitely.
You were being targeted a little.
Yes. Yeah, we learned after the fact that there was some targeting going on. And then also me as a player, I'm also always telling Randy, like, you know, my character wouldn't want this, but go ahead, go do it. Do the thing.
Yeah, you're always like, kill me.
I think one of the things that the group as a whole that we've been playing with is great too, is no one should want their character dead unless they want to play a new character or something like that, but they should always be open for the idea of their character dying, because that narratively is interesting. Because if you don't want your character to die, and let's say would quit the campaign if your character dies, that kind of eliminates the stakes. And if you're playing a campaign or something that just to have fun and kind of more silly and where death had no consequence up front, yeah, sure, that's fine. That's why it's always good to talk with your DM of what kind of campaign style it is. But the players trust that I'm not going to do something to them just for the sake of doing it. There's usually going to be a reason or a consequence or something like that. Like one of our people ended up having things happen to him out of a form of like almost consequence, not like a punishment, but like the character doing something like, oh, you should be doing this, you should be doing this. And at one point, all right, well, you messed around and you found out, you know. So,
well, we'll have more on these characters as time goes. We'll see if they continue to live or not.
It's not looking good for Friday.
Hey, I'm trying. You guys just won't stay down. You should probably have your new characters ready.
If you're just starting to play D&D, or if you're running out of new character ideas for that 200th Asterion-focused Baldur's Gate 3 playthrough, we've got your back. This is the Flash Round. We will roll initiative to see who goes first, and then everyone will take turns going down a preset list of character creation categories until we make a new person. After these episodes air, we invite you to download their prompt sheets on our Twitter. Feel free to play them in your home games and let us know who they become.
I just rolled a 16, so roll lower than that.
Oh, darn it. I rolled a 7. I guess you're going first.
I got a 12.
All right. So it looks like I'm kicking this one off with the race, which I am going to go with a Kenku.
Ooh.
Ah! Chicken.
Exactly.
Thank you. Okay, for class, I'm going to go druid.
Well, if it's going to be a druid, I mean, a Kenku is definitely wildfire. Easy.
Just like a little pyro bird.
Yeah. Burn it! Burn it!
For appearance, let's go with he's kind of like awkwardly tall for a Kenku. And then we'll go with dark brown feathers and a very, very short beak.
Like T-Rex arms short or like...
Yeah, we'll go with that.
Okay. Background, I think you have a oddly shaped Kenku that likes to set things on fire. I'm going to go hermit.
Well, I guess the flaw would be he likes to set things on fire.
A propensity for pyromania.
Well, and I guess his quirk would be that he can set things on fire.
That's not a quirk. That's a superpower.
Is there a difference?
I mean,
unless it's My Hero Academia, yeah.
It's both.
Jinx.
So maybe...
Do what you feel in your heart, Tuki. Do what you feel in your heart.
I'll go with that for his quirk. He ends up using longer sentences when he's nervous.
Relatable.
Okay, so for phobia, I'm going to go with he's terrified of thunderstorms.
Aww.
Mostly because it puts the fire out.
Yeah, it's fair. I think the trinket should be the ashes of one of his dead parents.
What is it with you and
wow.
the dead parents?
Don't worry about it.
Oh, I'm worried about it.
Let's just suddenly make it kind of twistedly dark, but overall, a fun character.
Are they at least in an urn?
Like a little Ziploc bag?
Sure. Yeah, I feel like it should definitely be something more like that.
Like a black box so that if the house burns down, nothing happens.
Yeah, I mean, it's a druid, so like it was wise enough to like put them into something, but not smart enough to put them into something like long lasting.
And then last but not least, for his name, we're going to go with Baywith.
Could you spell that for the judges?
Baewith.
Baywith, huh? Well, guess that's it for the little guy. Oh, and this week's podcast. Well, play us out, Tuki.
Thanks for listening. If you made it this far, add us on Twitter at DysFictionalPod to get our latest updates.
Original music for this podcast provided by Josh Silver, the artist known as Diminon on Spotify. Enjoy your week, and remember, if anything screams back at you from inside the void, it was probably me.